people, Google means you never get redemption. For his entire adult life, Zach Wisniewski's name has been linked to a criminal accusation that never led to charges. Police named him in a prostitution and drug investigation where they accused another teenage girl of prostitution. But no one faced charges for it, only low-level drug crimes. Here's just a short preview of his story.
It should be innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent.
For Zach, despite no charge or accusation, when you Google his name today, that's how the internet remembers him.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle. Once somebody's name is out there, especially in the age of the internet, you can't put it back in.
That's Lane Kimball, my boss. He's talking about a policy we've implemented within the past year. With a few exceptions for public officials or public safety concerns, we no longer name suspects before they've been formally charged with the crime.
The policy essentially is really forcing yourself to take a paradigm shift and say, instead of approaching a story going, why shouldn't we identify this person who is accused by police or by people of some sort of crime, and basically just doing a 180 and saying, why should we?
It was a big battle trying to get people to understand that that's not who I am, that's not me.
Zach's come to peace with a lot of this. People who know him know better. And now he's taking back his story here on the news where it began.
I did stuff wrong, but I think everything leads to a good place and everything happens for a reason. And if I hadn't done those things, I wouldn't have ended up here, and I wouldn't have been able to change other people's lives. Zach's story is far from unique. In today's world, lifelong repercussions from past mistakes are no farther away than a Google. It's far different than 20 or 30 years ago when past mistakes could often only be unearthed in dusty, poorly accessible newspaper archives. With this era comes a responsibility for us, the news gatherers, that newsrooms around the country are still trying to reckon with. I'm joined by Kathleen Culver, director of the University of Wisconsin Center for Journalism Ethics. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, happy to be here.
So, relatively speaking, the change that our newsroom made is a fairly small one. What are some of the farther-reaching, higher-profile changes that newsrooms are making around the country?
Well, I think one of the most notable is the Associated Press, which is a wire service that feeds lots of local news organizations, including your own, has decided not to name anyone arrested for what they have termed minor crimes. This arises from a concern that a low-level offense can follow a person for quite some time, and as you note, affect their employment opportunities, their housing in some cases. I mean, these can have very, very serious detrimental effects. There are other places, notably the Salt Lake Tribune has put into play, and the Boston Globe as well, processes for people to request removal of names that have already been published. So not just dealing with where we're headed from here, but how perhaps we right past wrongs.
The internet's been around for a few decades at this point. Google, not quite as long. These methods that make it so easy to find charges, not so long. How long has it taken newsrooms to kind of start coming to grips with how this new easy accessibility affects our responsibility in these kinds of issues?
I would argue it's taken them far too long. It's something that has, for quite some time, any requests to unpublish something were met with sort of disdain in some newsrooms that, well, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we're going to continue to do it. And a real failure to understand the implications of things living forever online. The talk started to get very serious after the murder of George Floyd and the protests over the summer of 2020. A lot of news organizations really began a look inward, and I congratulate them for that. I argue it came later than it should have, but I congratulate them for doing it. And I think the dominant thread of the conversation is that if there are inequities built into social systems, so for instance, if Black communities are over-policed and result in a greater number of arrests for drug and other low-level offenses, are we doubling down on that in journalism by reporting on it in the ways that we have in the past?
So in terms of Zach's story, this was a fairly easy call for our newsroom to say, hey, we're going to take down this article because it no longer falls under the policies that we operate under. But there's so many other gray area issues where people contact us, contact newsrooms all over the country to ask for their articles to be taken down. So what is the gray area of ethics there that newsrooms are grappling with when it comes to how do we decide which articles get taken down, which articles get forgotten, and which don't?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and you're right to say that this is very much a gray area. And I mentioned earlier that there had been sort of this rote approach of we don't unpublish anything, and that makes the decision very easy. We're just never going to do it, so there is no gray area. It's purely black and white. But one of the things I encourage newsrooms to do is to talk with people outside of the newsroom about these gray areas. The Boston Globe and the Salt Lake Tribune, as I mentioned, have processes in place where people can make these requests. There's a team of people both inside the newsroom and outside the newsroom that gets together to discuss them, because ethics is not just about those black and white easy calls. You know, I'm a person who says plagiarism is not an ethics question. It's just clearly wrong. There's no question whatsoever. Ethics is more about how we resolve those difficult questions and how we can justify our decisions to the people who are affected by them.
And a question particularly pertinent for you in your role at the University of Wisconsin, how do we teach these things to the new generation, the next generation of news gatherers?
Well, one of the ways I teach them is to not treat journalism ethics as this kind of walled garden within the newsroom, to be out talking with other people and getting their input. We have trust building to do in news. It's really important work to be done. And if we're seen as siloed and not responding to people's concerns and questions, that's going to damage trust, not build trust. I mean, I think what this story shows is that, you know, a person sent an email in, maybe it was kind of a strident email, but you listened. You said, hey, this is something that we need to consider in light of our current policy. And you made a decision that's justifiable to the people affected by it. So I think that's wonderful. We need more of that dialogue, more of that deliberation in journalism to help rebuild trust.
One thing I wanted to ask about, so in terms of this very specific policy about naming people before they're formally charged, was that always the status quo in news?
Yes, it was very commonly done. I started as a police and courts reporter, and I reported arrests all the time. Boy, do I wish I could go back and unring that bell. It was just seen as a standard practice. And I think one of the things that we're reflecting on now in journalism is that for far too long, we had a very serious deference to authority, that if police said something had happened, we tended to believe that it happened, and we would report it as such. So, turning back to the murder of George Floyd, in that case, the first press release that came from the Minneapolis police was that he had died during a, quote, medical incident. If that authority had been allowed to carry the day, if we hadn't had citizens who had video of the situation, who knows where we would have been, if we would have ever uncovered what actually happened to him. So now, as we're challenging that deference to authority, I think that's a good thing. It's not to say that you don't cover police fairly, that sometimes arrests are worth covering, particularly when we're talking about major crimes. We just have to constantly think in journalism how best to serve the public interest. And I'm glad you're talking about it with your viewers, because the more we can do to talk about processes in journalism and be open to challenges to those processes, the better we're all going to be served.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much for your time. And a note for viewers, this story spurred another policy change for us. If you, like Zach, think your name has a right to be removed from a crime story, head online to channel3000.com/removal to read our framework. You can also watch and read Zach's full story there. Just after the break, what a police union poll means for public safety perceptions in Wisconsin.